So the other day we talked about all of the angle pairs and the relationships that you have whenever you have a transversal. So just to recap, if you have two lines, your transversal is like that toothpick that goes through both of them. So I have two pictures here, both with the transversal. There's my transversal in that picture. There's my transversal in that picture. And we talked about all the different types of angles that you have. So just for example, corresponding was top left, same spot. So like top left, top left. 1 and 5 is corresponding. 2 and 6 is corresponding. 3 and 7, 4 and 8, that's corresponding. We also talked about interior, exterior. So these were our interior ones, and then these were our exterior ones. We talked about alternate interior would be like 3 and 6, or 4 and 5. Alternate exterior would be 1 and 8, or 2 and 7. We talked about same side interior. So same side interior would be like 3 and 5, or 4 and 6. We talked about same side exterior, 1 and 7, 2 and 8. Well, if there's something special about your lines, so I'm going to let you take a wild guess. What do you notice about the lines from this picture to this picture? And if there's something special about your lines, what happens is that you can start actually solving for these angles, and you can find all these angles with this relationship. So if you haven't figured it out, from picture to picture, our lines straighten out, and that's because our lines are parallel. So if I straighten those lines and I make them parallel, what happens is now you notice that the angles kind of look like they're the same. Like 1 is obtuse and so is 5. Now, this only works if the lines are parallel. Like over here, I notice that 1 is obtuse and 5 is acute. So they're corresponding, but that's about it. So if your lines are parallel, and that's the key phrase here, that's the catch here, is if the lines are parallel. So if the lines are parallel, and remember that parallel symbol is just a slash slash, but on your lines, you'll see that they're parallel with little arrows. And sometimes they'll do that, like they'll do an extra set of arrows there. Sometimes they'll move them to the front of the lines. Sometimes they'll fill them in like that. But if you see that extra set of arrows, that means that your lines are parallel, which remember just means that they're never going to intersect. They're equidistant apart. So if your lines are parallel, well then your corresponding angles, which I talked about how obtuse and obtuse, then your corresponding angles would be congruent. They'll be exactly the same. If one's 50, then the other one's going to be 50. So I'm making up numbers, but if angle 2 is 50 degrees, well then angle 6 would have to be 50 degrees because 2 and 6 are corresponding. So alternate interior angles, if I take a look, I notice that 3 is acute, 6 is acute, 4 is obtuse, but 5 is obtuse, so they match. So our alternate interior angles are also going to be congruent. So that means if I told you that angle 4 is 50 degrees, well now I know that angle 5 is 50 degrees because those are alternate interior angles. They're congruent, they match. Alternate exterior, so think, what would be alternate exterior to 1? Well, that'd be 8, and if you notice that's obtuse, that's also obtuse, those match. 2 would go with 7, acute and acute. I did draw this picture to scale, which is why I keep saying acute and obtuse, is because I made this picture to scale. So alternate exterior angles, they also match, they're also congruent. So if I told you that angle 2 is 50 degrees, well now we know that angle 7 is 50 degrees because those are alternate exterior. If I know that angle 2 is 50 degrees, I also know that angle 6 is 50 degrees because those are corresponding. So now I can start finding all the other angles. Okay, now same side interior. Same side interior would be 3 and 5. And if we notice one's acute and one's obtuse, if I add those together, they're going to add up to 180. So think, what's the word that means they add up to 180? That word's supplementary. So now, same side interior, if that's supplementary, now if 4 is 50 degrees, well then angle 6 would be 130 degrees. Because what's 180 minus 50? 130. And then if I look at same side exterior, that would be 1 and 7. Notice same thing, obtuse and acute. And the other side's acute and obtuse. So those ones would also be supplementary. Now, the way to remember this is that corresponding alternate interior, alternate exterior, they're all congruent. They're all going to be part equals part type problems. So those are all part equals part. But the same side, so notice that SS, those are your ones that are supplementary. So just remember, same side interior supplementary, same side exterior supplementary. And remember that supplementary means that the parts add up to 180. So what's really nice about these is that if you know one, you know them all. So if I tell you that angle 2 is 50 degrees, then that means that angle 2 corresponds to angle 6. That would also be 50 degrees. But if you remember alternate exterior, so angle 2 is 50, well, so is angle 7. That's also 50 degrees. And if you remember vertical angles, notice that the ones across from each other, so angle 3 is going to be 50 degrees. Well, if you remember that same side exterior adds up to 180, so if that's 50, that would have to be 130. Okay, and then if angle 4, that would be 130 as well, because those are corresponding angles. Notice that 1 and 8 are alternate exteriors, so that would be 130 as well, and then that would make angle 5 130 as well. So I got 130 from 180 minus 50. So if you notice, if you know one, you know them all. Now I'm going to go ahead and erase that. I'm going to put a number on here, and I want you to take a minute and see if you can figure out all the other angles. If I tell you, let's make angle 5 80 degrees. Angle 5 is 80 degrees. Take a minute and see if you could figure them all out. Well, if angle 5 is 80 degrees, hopefully you're able to get that angle 8 is 80 degrees, and so are angle 1 and angle 4. Those are all 80 degrees. All the other ones would be 180 minus 80 makes that 100 degrees, makes that 100 degrees, makes that 100 degrees, and makes that 100 degrees. So it's really nice if you have numbers, but you can do the same thing with expressions as well. So let's take a look at this problem right here. My lines are parallel. They showed me that with those little arrows. Sometimes I'll do more than one. First, I need to figure out what type of angles are these. So notice the spot that they're in. There's your transversal. They're on the interior. They're on the same side. So these would be same side interior. Which, same side interior, if I go back and look at my chart, same side interior supplementary, which is part plus part equals 180. So I'm going to set this up. P plus P equals 180. And if I'm adding these parts together, I can just go ahead and combine like terms. So 20x plus 5, 24x minus 1. 20x and 24x would make that 44x. Plus 5 minus 1 would make that plus 4. It's going to add up to 180. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead and solve. So I'm going to try to get x by itself. So this is where I'm going to subtract 4. And I am going to get faster and faster with the solving, because remember, geometry is about geometry. Solving for x is an Algebra 1 skill. So 180 minus 4 is 176. Divide both sides by 44. And 176 divided by 44 is 4. So x equals 4. Now, if you had to find the angle, all you would need to do with that x is to go and plug it back in. So if we take a look at our next one, so I have an angle here and here. So they're on different sides of the transversal. They're on the outside. So that would be alternate exterior. Alternate exterior is congruent, which is part equals part. So I'm going to set these parts equal to each other. So I'm going to say -1 plus 14x equals 12x plus 17. And I'm doing that because they were alternate exterior. That's congruent, which is part equals part. So I have variables on both sides. That's okay. I'm going to put the letter on the left by subtracting 12x from the 14x. So I have -1 plus 2x equals 17. Now the opposite of a -1 would be a +1. 17 plus 1 is 18, so 2x equals 18. From there, divide both sides by 2. X would equal 9. And if you wanted to find the angle, all you'd have to do is go back and plug it in. Okay, taking a look at another one. Once you start figuring out what type of angle you have, Then it just is a matter of setting it up and solving for x. So taking a look at these, I'm going to give you a minute to see if you can figure out what type of angles those are. Now bottom right is your clue, which means that they're corresponding in that same spot. And corresponding, if I go back and look, corresponding angles are congruent, which means part equals part. So all I'm going to do is set these pieces equal to each other, set those parts equal to each other. So I have 23x minus 5 equals 21x plus 5. To get the letter on the left, I'm going to subtract 21x from 23x. So I have 2x minus 5 equals 5. And then from there, I'm going to add 5 to both sides, trying to get x by itself. So 2x equals 10, which makes x equal 5. And that's it. So the hard part of these is figuring out what type of angle do you have and then using that to go through and solve. So if I take a look at this one now, I have an x and a y. It's okay. I know that this is 100. I'm going to use that. So first, I'm going to use this and ask myself, what type of angles are those? Top right. Well, top right makes those corresponding, and corresponding is part equals part. So I could say x minus 10 equals 100, or 100 equals x minus 10. Add 10 to both sides, x would be 110. Okay, well that's x. Now I need to figure out what's y. I don't want to try to use those and deal with multiple variables. Now I'm going to take a look at these angles. Okay, I know that they're on the same side. They're not corresponding. We just had corresponding. They're on the same side. They're on the outside, which makes them same side exterior, which means that they add up to 180. So if they add up to 180 and I combine like terms, I'm going to get 2y plus 124 equals 180. Now, what some people like to do is some people know if that's 100, well, what's 180 minus 100? 80. And some people will solve this equation instead of that one. It doesn't matter. Either way, we're going to get the same answer. So I'm going to go ahead and start by subtracting 124 on both sides. So now I have 2y equals 56. And then from there, we just divide both sides by 2. Y would equal 28. That's it. So taking a look at this last one that we're going to look at, it might look a little bit complicated. If you notice, we have 3 lines and still 1 transversal. Okay, I'm going to use 120 both times because I don't want to try to have x and y together. Okay, so I'm going to start by figuring out what do I know about these angles. And if you can't remember whether they're corresponding, alternate interior, alternate exterior, same side interior, same side exterior, just ask yourself, do you think that they would be part equals part or part plus part? And if you notice they're both obtuse, my picture's drawn to scale, so this is going to be part equals part. So 3x would equal 120. Divide both sides by 3, so x would equal 40. Okay, now I have to figure out what type of angles are these. Well, one's on the exterior, one's on the interior. There's actually nothing special about these angles, but I can figure out what this equals. If this is 120, then all of these angles should be 120. Ask yourself, what would be the other angles? What would be the acute angles here? Well, 180 minus 120 is 60 degrees. So if these are 120, then those acute angles should equal 60. So that's how I'm going to solve for y. 6y minus 12 equals 60. I'm going to add 12 to both sides. So 6y equals 72. Divide both sides by 6, y equals 12. So even if you get stumped on the vocabulary, ask yourself, look at the picture. Would it be part equals part or part plus part equals 180? Those are going to be your only 2 options on these problems. And you have this little cheat chart if you need it.